For millennia, the Imperium of Man operated on a very comfortable assumption about the Orks. The doctrine was simple. They are brutal, they are incredibly violent, and crucially, they are mindless. If you built a high enough wall and pointed enough guns at it, the greenskins would predictably throw themselves into the Meatgrinder until they ran out of bodies. That assumption held true until a skirmish on the ash wastes of the planet Urk. A completely unremarkable Ork trooper caught a Space Marine bolter shell directly to the face. The explosive round pulverized a massive chunk of his cranium and turned his frontal lobe to mush. By all biological logic, he should have died in the dirt right then and there. But he didn't. Instead, his mob dragged his bleeding body to a local surgeon known as Mad Doc Grotznick. Grotznick replaced the missing skull fragments with adamantium plates, wired up the remaining brain tissue with crude bionics, and stitched it all together with squig sinew. This operation rewired the Orks' neural architecture. When the trooper, Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka, woke up from the operating table, he possessed a terrifying new clarity. He claimed he was now in direct, continuous contact with the Ork deities, Gork and Mork. The gods were speaking to him, and they were giving him explicit tactical instructions. He immediately put those instructions to work. Ghazghkull bypassed simple brawling and outmaneuvered his rivals. He sabotaged enemy fuel dumps, used controlled shantytown fires to create smokescreens for his advancing infantry, and coerced rival leaders into submission through highly calculated spectacles of force. Within weeks, he united the planet's warring tribes under a single banner, displaying a level of strategic planning the Imperium believed his species was physically incapable of. This botched operation replaced the mindless brute with a strategic anomaly, shattering every existing Imperial assumption about Ork behavior. Ghazghkull needed a larger stage to test his new intellect, and he found it on the heavily fortified Imperial hive world of Armageddon. When his massive junk armada arrived to kick off the Second War for Armageddon, the planetary defenders prepared for a standard, disorganized Ork assault. They were completely blindsided. This tactical map shows the rigid Imperial defense lines stationed in the ash wastes outside the hive cities. Notice how Ghazghkull's forces don't charge straight into the guns. Instead, he deployed speed-freak biker mobs to outflank the defenders, while simultaneously beaming down shock troops behind the lines using pinpoint teleportation technology. As the arrows constrict around the Imperial positions, you can see the result. Ghazghkull systematically choked off every external supply route. The planetary defense forces found themselves trapped in a shrinking cauldron, surrounded and picked apart by highly coordinated artillery fire. Only one Imperial commander managed to disrupt this perfect offensive. At Hades' hive, an aging commissar named Sebastian Yarrick rallied his terrified troops. Through sheer, stubborn willpower and relentless countertactics, Yarrick stalled the Ork advance, forcing a brutal, months-long siege that bought the Imperium enough time to counterattack. Ghazghkull viewed Yarrick as his best enemy, a spiritual peer who provided the highest level of combat. In Ork culture, a foe who can offer a truly spectacular fight is held in higher regard than almost any ally. Years later, after tracking Ghazghkull to the planet Golgotha, Yarrick was finally captured. He was thrown into an Ork space hulk, stripped of his weapons and surrounded. But Ghazghkull didn't execute him. Instead, the Warlord returned Yarrick's gear, provided him with a fully fueled shuttle, and let him go, telling the Commissar to prepare for their next fight. Conquering a planet is a finite achievement. Ghazghkull realized that if you want a war that lasts forever, you have to cultivate enemies capable of fighting it. He let Yarrick live to ensure the Imperium would bring their absolute best to the next battle. 57 years after his first invasion, Ghazghkull returned to Armageddon. This time, he arrived at the head of the largest Ork fleet in recorded history, initiating the Third War for Armageddon. The Imperium responded with everything they had. They threw millions of troops, entire Space Marine chapters, and colossal defensive networks into battle. The conflict quickly locked into a planetary-scale stalemate. And then, at the absolute height of the bloodshed, Ghazghkull did something entirely illogical. He boarded his flagship and left the Armageddon system, leaving his generals to command the front lines. This map illustrates the macroscopic layout of the galaxy around the Armageddon system. Ghazghkull used Armageddon as a deliberate planetary-scale meat grinder. It was a lure designed to pull in thousands of scattered Ork clans who were looking for a fight. Look at these converging data points. As the scale of the violence on Armageddon grew, it generated a psychic resonance known as Waaagh energy. This invisible frequency broadcasts across the stars, pulsing like a beacon. The longer the battle rages, the louder the signal gets, drawing fresh waves of greenskins into the war zone every single day. Every trench the Imperium held, every counterattack they launched, and every heroic stand they made simply added fuel to that signal. The humans thought they were defending a hive world. In reality, they were serving as the whetstone Ghazghkull was using to sharpen an unstoppable, unified Ork army. Decades later, the Imperium finally secured what looked like a permanent victory. During the Battle of Krongar, Space Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane engaged Ghazghkull in brutal single combat. With a single strike of his heavy frostblade, Blackmane sliced cleanly through the Warlord's thick neck, severing his head from his shoulders. But Ork biology defies human logic. While the Imperium celebrated the death of the beast, a lowly attendant scooped up Ghazghkull's severed head from the dirt and rushed it back to Mad Doc Grotznik, the exact same surgeon who had operated on him centuries earlier. Grotznik immediately began the most ambitious surgery of his life. He gathered the largest, strongest body parts donated by eager Ork volunteers, built an entirely new massive cybernetic chassis, and bolted Ghazghkull's head on top. To keep the monstrous creation pumping blood, he ripped the fuel pump out of an Ork vehicle and wired it directly into the chest cavity as a makeshift heart. 10 days later, Ghazghkull woke up. He was now exponentially larger, heavily armored, and infused with so much raw psychic energy that his mere physical presence acted as a homing beacon, drawing greenskins from light years away just by existing. This is the paradox the Imperium faces. A bolter shell to the head turned a foot soldier into a tactical genius. A planetary defense forced him to engineer a galaxy-wide recruitment drive. A clean decapitation by a space marine lord resulted in a warlord twice the size with a truck engine for a heart. Every Imperial attempt to kill the beast inadvertently upgraded his size, reach, and psychic influence, turning their greatest heroes and weapons into the unwitting engineers of their own perfect apocalypse.